How are you?
I'm good. Good. How are you? Thanks so much for connecting and for letting me be here.
Which part of the world are you at right now? And is it
Right
warm?
now, it's I'm in the Midwest, so I am based in Columbia, Missouri, so right in between Kansas City and St. Louis, and just coming back from a work trip from the desert in Scottsdale, so adjusting. But it's been rainy here, but to be expected in Missouri.
I'm in sunny Seattle, as they call it. It's never
Is
sunny.
it? I was there for the first time. Never been to Seattle. Was there last month, and it was like the 2 days out of the entire year where it was beautiful. So I felt very fortunate.
You were here when it wasn't raining?
Yeah, it was like gorgeous outside, and everybody seemed like they were like coming out of a cocoon. And so, from my experience, Seattle is sunny. So I got very
That never
lucky.
happens except for 2 days in July, I think. But that's awesome. Amber, give us a 2 minute background just about yourself. You do work with a lot of startups. You do a lot of go-to-market work as well. And so, what we wanted to talk about today was about go-to-market, how you're using AI. But first, give us a little bit of background so people get to know you a little bit.
Sure, I'll try to be concise. So I started out really in content in editorial. I went to school for magazine journalism of all things. Graduated in first session. My dad is a civil engineer. My mom is a nurse. They were like, Why are you doing this?" I'm like, "I want to do journalism," because I didn't know any better, but I always liked to write. So that was 2009. So graduated into one of the worst job labor markets that you could possibly imagine. Had to really adjust kind of like what I wanted to do and what I thought was going to happen. Really wanted to go into like lifestyle feature writing for like a fashion magazine. So it's funny to
Nice.
kind of end up in
That's
like,
the old school. That's the old school influencer job, right?
yeah, I really was because I was, the way, PR packages kind of work now, it is just kind of the original kind of influencing was, magazines. So wanted to go that route, really was not interested in marketing whatsoever. I think a lot of my former, editorial and writing, colleagues or former classmates kind of switched over, toward the content marketing side, just kind of the way the industry has shifted. But yeah, kind of just needed a job and started out in digital marketing for an agency doing display media buying. So Netflix was one of the first accounts that I worked on. We were serving ads and just kind of doing digital ad flipping, if you will. So what I learned from that is I really liked making money while I was sleeping. I really liked the kind of the negotiations, media placements, like finding segmentation. So really just started in digital agencies, and I was actually in sales. And so started out in sales just because I really needed a job. If you can sell internet services without a website from like a room somewhere in the middle of nowhere with very little help, and close big customers and big media agencies that are looking to outsource that business, you can kind of do anything. So it was a great kind of foray into just like building a business. I think I was the ninth employee. The company's still around today, and growing. And so kind of got a little bit of a knack for startups and kind of just building businesses from
Nice.
the ground up. So kind of switched over there, and then ended up learning some SEO at a local agency. I learned that I would really, the local businesses is tough. The budgets are so much smaller. So whenever you work for like Coca-Cola or Ralph Lauren on these big media buys, it's really kind of difficult to, kind of scale down and work with some budgets that are much smaller. So really liked working with, the client, long term instead of pushing you over to an account manager. So decided to go in-house. Spent some time at a insurance tech company that got acquired by a large underwriter that it was really, really interesting to see and kind of be like a CMO of a $10 million company that just got acquired by, like a multi-billion dollar global underwriter.
Wow.
And so just kind of how, startups operate, and then like it was publicly listed. And sorry, my dog. They're gonna jump back in. But yeah,
Yeah.
kind of fast forward, I started out in, bootstrap non-venture backed companies. They weren't necessarily, they were upstarts. I wouldn't say they're necessarily startups, but they had startup characteristics. And it really kind of had a good footing for kind of just like focusing on profitability over revenue, and like focusing on net profit, and really being responsible for sustaining the business by itself. And it really served me when I moved into venture backed companies, which my first proper VC-backed company was Equipment Share, which is a YC company. They graduated, they were in the winter of 2015 batch. And so I, kind of just to keep it short, helped scale that from a Series B to Series D. From 2017 to 2021, we went from about 50 employees is when I joined, and then we scaled to over 2,500 by the time I left in 3.5 years. We went from 5 markets to over 65 markets across the US, and it was brick and mortar, also a SaaS component, IoT. So it was technology, but also like physical brick and mortar locations, which, once you kind of get some formula, we had really high, ARR numbers that we were trying to hit. Kind of think of like Uber whenever they were expanding all over the place, and really started to, hit their stride. Very similar. I think I'm finally getting out of my recovery mode from like, growing that business from 2017 to 2021. They're worth about 4.5 billion now, and they're in their like
Wow.
Series E. So they've just incredible enterprise value, created a lot of jobs, really kind of turned the construction industry on its head a bit. Big public companies like to call them like dinosaurs got really comfortable with just kind of like making money for shareholders, weren't innovating. Like United Rentals and H&E. Before they didn't never heard of us, and now they're pissed at us, they were pissed at us for taking all their talent because we just created great culture. We had tech, and we were offering, the end user, really focusing on offering the end user what they wanted versus just kind of pushing out the same thing and charging more. So yeah, that was crazy. Joined a fintech shortly after that. I really like the early stage, so joined a
Yeah.
fintech of out of the Bay Area. We built a credit card focused on B2B SMB. So we were really trying to help, small business owners build credit. Consumer credit and business credit's very different. So, first time business owners that just didn't have access to capital. It's really easy to make money whenever you have money. It's very difficult, in the US to when there's not generational wealth there, existing capital to be able to pull from. So got into there, and that's when the AI, that's where I really got the in and outs of AI. They were a proper AI company before it was cool, is what I like to say. They came out of startups. They had IP. There was like, full patents there that was really looking at just like credit risk modeling. So
Mm.
there was proper machine learning in place. We had machine learning engineers. I got to learn all about like exactly what, that AI does and like why it mattered. And so that was in 2021. We got acquired in 2023. So before we could raise the Series B by a late stage
You've had
competitor.
so many
Yeah,
acquisitions, man. That's pretty
it was
cool.
a crazy run. Honestly, everybody's praying for exits, but I think we were all a little bit sad whenever we got scooped up, just because we had just started to like our organic marketing was taking off, all these things that we had put in place, and we're just running towards, we're really starting to see the fruits of that labor. We built a SaaS product, so an app for credit building. We also built a physical, credit card. So we were in payments. None of us had ever had credit card, like, fintech experience in the payment section specifically, but we were able to get one up and stood up in 9 months. We did that with MasterCard. So that was crazy. But yeah, so what I'm kind of focused on now is really just kind of figuring out how to continue to support founders. I've done some early stage investing, some angel investing. I've done a secondary sale, and I've seen the market when it comes to venture just go up and down. It's been kind of nuts to be in it from a non-founder perspective. I'm pretty good at spotting companies that I think have legs. So I do a lot of mentorships. I'm part of a venture fellowship it's called Material Change Institute. I'm also a mentor at the University of Washington's Foster School of Management for their industrial AI stream. So just kind of helping founders when it comes to go-to-market and marketing. So yeah, I know that was long-winded. I apologize.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell me a little bit about when you start thinking about AI. Now, everybody, since ChatGPT has been out almost a couple of years now, a little more than a couple of years, everybody's using it in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've talked to a lot of people over the last few months on how they're using AI in their daily life. How are
Hmm.
you using it? Start with what are the things that you use daily for? What are some things that it's helped you with, or some of the things that it hasn't helped with?
Sure. It's one of those things where I like to use and bring in tools. I have a love-hate relationship with third-party tools in general. I don't think necessarily Chat GPT is a third-party tool, but I think that there's kind of a lot of maybe solutions looking for problems in the space. When it comes to Chat GPT, I'm a big fan of Perplexity. Personally, I trust it a bit more. I feel it's been very useful for me. I will say that I'm somebody that is very much like, if I need it, then I'm gonna go find a solution, but I'm not just gonna start like just doing all these prompts just to do prompts. Like, of course, there's probably ways I could be leveraging it better, but at the moment, I'm a mom of two. Always working in startups, things are always moving pretty quickly. When it comes to marketing, I think it's just like any other technology. I don't think it's going to replace, everyone. I think it's going to replace some areas, but it's going to reskill some people into other areas to do other things. For me personally, ChatGPT is why I have kind of a. It's not that I avoid it, but I've gotten into fights with it, asking about its training models. I'm like, when was your data last trained, and it can't give me a good answer, and that kind of pisses me off from like a data integrity perspective. And so, I don't, I've seen it kind of, there's some bias in there that when it comes to like ethics and AI, and I take that very seriously. We were doing ethics and AI, we were doing ethical AI and financial decision
Yeah.
making. If it's it, we've made such good progress when it comes to removing bias and making sure that things, people are protected when they're using these different products, especially when it comes to like consumer lending and stuff. To kind of all of a sudden to adopt it. Google search was my baby for a long time. It still is. I learned that algorithm in and out, especially when I was like doing lead gen for these companies that were really focused on just like inbound leads. I call it kind of Web 2.0,
Yeah.
and organic search is one of is it's kind of my marketing bread and butter. That's where I not most feel comfortable, but if I am a marketer, I'm an organic marketer. So to kind of just trust blindly, kind of where all this data is coming from. And at the end of the day, like what we're giving these AI models is what it's learning off of. So like ChatGPT is like it's a bit, there's a lot going on, and I don't totally know exactly the transparency of it and when the models are trained off of. And so a lot of it's Reddit, some of it's Twitter, some like a database perspective. I use Perplexity. I use Perplexity a lot for like prepping about companies or people. So if I'm meeting with certain clients or wanting to know like, if I got a big meeting coming up, I'll be like, tell me everything I need to know about X plus this. And then I get a really quick like primer. So it's a really great time saver when it comes to that. And you can really see all the sources where it's coming from, and it kind of deduces its own conclusions. I like the follow-ups that you can do from it so you can dig down deeper. I think that there's still some stuff that, the fact that booking flights is still such a pain in the butt. I think that there's areas, the fact that like I still have to fold all my laundry. So I have a love-hate relationship with, AI, because like there's so much automatable stuff, especially because I came from construction and we had a robotics platform that we were pushing out and working on. There's just so many things that are still, a company that I was just at last year, electricians are still going in and like you doing their field work. Every
Hmm.
single building everywhere has electricity, and these electricians that are supposed to be like, that powers everything. They're still using like pen and paper, taking pictures on their phone, and then like typing in all this important data for like how construction builds get made. Like that's still not that's not automated at all. So I don't know, maybe I'm just getting older. So I like to use AI whenever it really is helpful. So I think there's sometimes some over engineering of things that don't really drive impact. But for me, I like it for a lot of prep. Sometimes I'll use some AI tools. There's one, Jasper.ai has been around for a long time. I really like that one for copywriting. I think that it can help, like, when it comes to like content strategy. Some of it still, there's definitely like some stuff that just feels and looks like AI. A lot of the pitch deck programs, they're good, but it always kind of feels like the AI did it for you. So I always think it's a great combo if you can like help it get you there. But at the end of the day, there's always some things that are just going to be better if like a human is along the whole way. So again, leveraging it as a tool, not as like a replacement for the work, because it's always going to be, it's a shortcut, right? So I think if you use it right, it can be super helpful. I think what it can be great for is like taking out the heavy lifting of things, whenever it's stuff that just is time consuming. The agentic space is very popular. Human error is like a lot. I don't know if replacing like an AI with another AI like that was kind of powered by two humans that are prone to human error is the best way to go. So, I could go about this for a while, but we'll see how
I
it
do
goes.
that. So I do that right now. I I
How's that experience been? Is it like, what have you seen the most success with whenever you're talking about agentic?
I was talking to you a little bit before we got started, right? So after I finish, for example, I do about 6 or 7 interviews like this every week.
Hmm.
And because they are recorded, it just goes into AI. For
Hmm.
example, I take the transcript on CapCut. After I
Yes.
take the transcript and transcript, it automatically sends it to ChatGPT. It
Hmm.
summarizes it for me. I take that and create a prompt that goes into Claude
Okay.
automatically. I don't have to do anything. So it creates a prompt for me. So out of that discussion, let's say you and I have a discussion,
Hmm.
there's a sequence of things that happens that I don't touch at all. It gets
Okay.
posted onto YouTube, it gets posted onto Spotify, it gets
Oh,
posted,
fantastic. Yes, I love
then
that.
the
Yeah.
Canva image gets made. All I have to do is just give your LinkedIn profile to my I've created a custom GPT and I've also created a Bardeen. So it creates that completely. The image gets created, the thumbnail gets created,
Oh,
the
fantastic.
transcript gets
Okay.
created.
Mm,
Everything is
that's
sequenced.
awesome.
So I don't
Yeah.
have to touch a thing. And by the way, about 6 months ago, I had two people sitting and doing this for me, and it's
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
sequenced.
And that is that is a perfect use of AI. I think what's weird for me personally is that, I've been using like if this then that and Zapier for like a long time, and so in chatbots, and things like that. So stuff that's seen as a marketer, especially, we've been hooking up and getting things to talk to each other through little AI API kind of like holes everywhere.
Correct.
So I think that
It's
I
like
just
duct
think a
tape
lot of people are
marketing.
people are just using it like too broadly a bit too without fully understanding that, machine learning has been around for forever, like a very long time. And so I think that what I get frustrated with a lot when it comes to AI is that just there's a lot of not misinformation, but just a lot of kind of just people speaking to it without kind of really providing a really good understanding of what it is. And with that comes what comes a slippery slope because you start training these models and investors are start looking at different software that's not actually proprietary. So I love whenever the shortcuts, automations, when it comes like you've been using HubSpot for forever. I love HubSpot. We've been setting up trigger events from a marketing perspective for drip campaigns for forever. It's just an if this then that. And so I think it's kind of just taking on like new semantics, but yes, absolutely. Automation for like cumbersome workflows. Absolutely. That's where the efficiency comes into play. And you can really start to focus your day and your time on stuff that matters and it requires strategy, that requires, your brain more because at the end of the day, it's all just, time is a finite resource.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that is interesting to me that I wanted to get your take on is have you tried? So when I talk to a lot of people about their use of AI, there are five buckets that people put it into. A set of people talk about, like the use case you talked about, they use Perplexity or ChatGPT to learn stuff. They're like, hey, I don't know
Hmm.
this topic. I'm going to research before I go to talk to somebody, or somebody has given me an assignment, or I'm going to talk to a customer. Let me understand this topic very well. So it's a
Hmm.
learning use case. The second use case is the pre-prep use case, right? Which is I'm going to go meet somebody or I have to prepare for an
Hmm.
interview or whatever that preparation use case is. The
Hmm.
third one is content creation, right? So what they
Hmm.
do is they say, I'm writing a blog post or can you give me an outline? Can you tell me what are the
Hmm.
topics I should cover? What should I miss? And then the fourth use case that I've seen very consistently, this is a very interesting one. So I started doing this over the last 2, 3 weeks. I have an input prompt done. I have a system prompt
Hmm.
done, an output prompt done. I give it to ChatGPT, I give it to Claude, and I make them sequence between each other. So I get a
Hmm.
5,000 word blog post written in a matter of an hour.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I think also when it comes to content creation, there is there there's Gen AI came out with Adobe, and there's some really cool stuff that you can do when it comes to that. There is another one that I've been super impressed by, and I'm trying to think of the name, and I'll have to come back to it because it is really changing the way that like imagery looks like, especially for creative directors, and it doesn't look like AI. It's fantastic. But I think that can just like really kind of push like brand imagery and kind of just the way people are like creating just commercial imagery when it comes to that, because it all kind of looks the same, stock photos and things like that. I'm a big authenticity person. I think that there is a big reason why any of the companies that I built have done what they've been able to do is because we were always focused on being authentic because that's all we had, right? We had, very little budget. We had like 1.5 people. There's nothing in there. And so where do you start, right? And if you can connect with your user and you can find their pain points and find a way to relate to them instead of just selling to them, that's how you win in startups, especially early stage, because that you're just a word that hasn't been trademarked yet that sounds like nothing and goofy. And so how do you make that, it's just like Nike, how do you make that word mean something to people? And it's through authenticity. I think that whenever you rely too much on things like AI, that's the whole, they're antithetical to each other. So I think that they're great for shortcuts. I think they're great for efficiency. I think that founders and VCs that think that they can just, kill off 8 of their marketers and they've got a team of, 15 and they can just use AI is silly. I think that's somebody who doesn't really understand business. They don't understand brands. So if you don't have a brand, you have nothing because that's what that marketing is so important. And of course, like the product is important, but if nobody knows about the product, then what's the whole point? So I think there's a lot of just like founders, I think the YC camp kind of like undermines and kind of like under just doesn't really give marketing its credit. 500 startups. I know that, at one point in time, like 500 and YC were very big
Right,
leading,
right.
incubators, but 500 really understood how important marketing was, whereas YC's focused more on the engineering. I think they're both important, but if you don't have a brand, you have nothing. You can raise off of a great brand and a story in the early stage, and that happens all the time, every day. So,
Did you work with 500 startups or any of the companies from them at all?
um,
I know Dave very, very well,
yeah,
Dave
I
McClure,
actually
and I
just
knew
I
a lot
just
of the
had
other
a
folks as well.
I had a
Christine
call with
Tsai
Dave a
and
couple weeks ago. Yeah, actually, he's the reason that I so Dave is somebody I followed. He's been around since like, Gawker, tech, like back in the day, like 20 square, what I call it like, just early 2010s, whenever we were using, was it Square? No, whatever we did to
Hmm,
like check into places, like, just whenever Uber just got started. So I've been following him. He's kind of one of the reasons, him and Jason Calacanis actually on Twitter, these like tech Twitter, like they were just big voices. And so I started to really get into startup marketing, probably because of, people like him, Dave and J Cal, to be honest, just got really interested in building companies. And then Dave is one of the reasons that I am in my venture fellowship right now. So having
very
reached out to
nice.
him, wanted to start moving into like investing over operations and really kind of figuring out how to leverage, my operator skills for a bigger, set of problems. And so yeah, he's great. I love the
Yeah,
way he
no,
thinks
that's
about
awesome.
stuff. And
I
mhm.
still end up meeting him once a year when I go down to the Bay Area because he lives very close to where my sister lives. I usually go see
Okay.
my sister. I end up catching up with him as well. Yeah, he's a good guy, and even with all the challenges we all have gone through, he's
Hmm.
been there for us for quite a bit of time. Awesome. Let's wrap up now with a couple of different questions for you in terms of if you were a founder,
Hmm.
because 60% of my audience is founders, entrepreneurs, individual contributors, right? You're a founder, you've got a small team, you've built the product, you've got some early customers, you're trying to do go to market. How
Hmm.
would you, what advice would you give them as the first thing as a go to market strategy they should focus on? Would you say it is going to be more about events, blogs, SEOs, whatever you think is the right approach? What do you think you would do,
Sure.
especially if they're B2B?
If I was, founder, I've always kind of avoided it, to be honest, because it's just the hardest job in the world. It's taking other people's money. There's immense pressure. You are asking people to leave like stable lives to like come on the risk. It's fun, but there's a lot of like accountability and responsibility, obviously, that comes with it, with a very low, success rate, statistically speaking. But if I've seen a lot of it, as you become like a, 4 or 5 times founding marketer, it's much harder to work for first time founders just because it's a tough dynamic. But I would say that you got to really focus on CAC. What does it take to acquire a customer? And then not just you acquire them once and get as much money out of them as possible down the long run. It's not just like startups have a tendency to just throw money at a problem and just buy customers to get that traction going. That is how so many businesses and so many early stage startups fail. They go and buy stuff because they just have money. The wire hits and then they just like they're a startup and it's all fun and games until it's
Yeah.
not because these investors that they do want when their money back. Startups are an asset vehicle, and I think that sometimes people forget that. But I would definitely hire somebody for product, get your engineering, don't outsource it, absolutely bring it in house. It's not something to outsource when you're a tech company. That is everything, and anything that you should care about. That's what the value prop is, right? So engineering, uh, and some new products, and then in marketing, that can kind of cover those three bases. And customer success would be like my fourth one. So get like a kind of a dream team, like an Avenger team of those five, and then absolutely just go ham. Meet regularly. Those four to five people, like those, that's your like core team, and you're basically meeting as frequently as possible. I would say every other day. You have a huddle. Everyone's on the same page. The founders got, marching orders, three different KPIs or three OKRs you're trying to hit for the quarter at hand and 6 months outlook, because startups things change too much, and you really just focus on that with a North Star in place all the time. And that's when I've seen like the magic happen, because if it keeps things from like, department silos happening. Whenever product and marketing are disconnected, or product and sales, you've got nothing. If your founder can't sell the product and can't speak to it and needs to hire an expensive SDR, that's not a startup that I want to work at. That's not a startup that anybody should. That's not an investable company, because like that's that founder, it's about investability. It's one of those things where if you need to like bring over a salesperson to sell your own product, that's a problem, right? So your founder should always be selling. The founder should always be trying to have conversations, and never ever get away from your end customer. Never forget your early adopters. Always, like, the people that put you there. If you got your first big enterprise client, you reward them with loyalty, and the longer they stay with you, you don't forget about them. Yeah, those would be some quick hits I would just kind of think of offhand.
Awesome. Amber, this was terrific. I'm glad that we connected. I
Yeah, me too. Thank you
apologize
so
for
much.
pulling you out when you were in the middle of something, but it was great to get you connected, great to get started. Thanks for the time again. And
Absolutely. No,
this
thanks
was
for this.
good.
Congrats. Yeah, I love it. I'm happy to share. I think that's kind of, I'm in my era where I'm like, I need to start sharing this with people, because it's one of those things where, it's too many mistakes being made the early stages. It's especially right now, the landscape is just, it's not great right now. So hopefully it gets better. And thank you so much again for having me. It's been fun.